Welcome to the FRCL Weekly Call. We're a group of distribution leads who get together regularly to discuss works in progress, share ideas, and create opportunities for cross-distro collaboration.
All right. Hey, everybody. It is August 26th of 2026. We are leads in the Fedora, RHEL, and CentOS space, and probably more particularly for today's topic, we've got a bunch of people from the Community Linux Engineering Organization, which is kind of Red Hat, but also 100% community time. So the topic for today is two-factor authentication, principally in FAS, but overall in kind of relevant across the board. So quick backstory on this. It turns out that memorizing a password and using it forever is not a good idea. It's actually good to have something you know and something you have. And that's a way more robust security model. But not everybody does it. And because not everybody does it, many people are more vulnerable to having their credentials stolen than others. So inside Red Hat, a few months ago now, we got a mandate that all of our commits, like internally, like in GitLab and whatnot, needed to be backed by 2FA so that we could not inadvertently become the object or like the vector for a supply chain attack. And most people, when told you have to do this thing, like, no, I will do the thing that makes sense. But in this case, the thing that they were told to do is also the thing that made sense. So there was just like, yeah, we're already there for most people, right? And one of the things that followed from that was a question of, well, what does this mean in the community space? Because we are not in charge there. And in some cases, like, we use SSH for these things. So what does that mean anyway? And the answer was, well, this mandate is like, it's a good idea, but in the community space where you're not actually in charge of things, you have to do what the community supports. So inside CLE, we put together, or had begun to put together, a proposal to make two-factor authentication mandatory and fast for the packager group. I think there were a few other variations. Like, if Jeff, I think he might have had some other input on this. And just as we were getting ready to actually propose this to FESCO, FESCO chose to do something related at the same time, and that was have 2FA be mandatory for proven packagers, which is like a smaller problem set, a smaller problem space, and probably like a more valuable one, right? Because if you can change anybody's package, wow, that's like you're definitely more of a target. So based on that happening, we CLE have not put forward this proposal yet, because we are kind of looking to see what's coming of this, what's actually the end result of this lesser thing. So I think I don't not remember if it was Maxwell or Fabio who said, "Hey, can we talk about this at FRCL today?" Because I think we all recognize the validity of going in this direction, and maybe it has implications beyond just Fedora. And maybe there is some work that needs to be done to make this a viable thing across the board. Like, it's not that people aren't aware of two-factor authentication, it's that some of the obstacles to adopting it or recovering from a lost device or other such things are preventing them from going on board. So that's like the overall background that I have. And I'm curious, does anybody want to like stand up and say, here's what I think it needs to be done, or here are the things you didn't cover, Brendan? It's like, give me a hand. Steve, go ahead. Steve, on mute.
There we go. Is that better?
Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry about that. I think one of the things that'll need to happen is some engineering time with the actual service to make it so that we don't have somebody or some people needing to send out manual emails and following up. Hey, did you onboard into this? Did you move into this? But more of a self-service way of onboarding for those who might not be keeping up to date with the notifications or the announcements or things like that. That I think would go a long way, but it will take time to do that work. So I think that's one area, because right now, if I remember correctly, we set kind of there was a deadline of a couple days from now with some of the proven packagers, if I understand correctly, and there's manual emails back and forth. But I think moving, it's good for a smaller group of folks, but for the larger set of folks, we'll want them to be able to onboard themselves, but also hold them to that need to actually onboard themselves before they can continue to do stuff. Go ahead, Maxwell.
Yes, hello everyone. Did you want me to kind of fill in some other details about the FESCO discussion about the proven packager decision, or do people kind of know that already?
Can't hurt.
Okay. Yeah, so there was like this weird incident where like some accounts seem to have been compromised by some AI model something, and someone was letting an AI model run amok on like Bugzilla and like doing random weird things, and there's a long like mailing list discussion about it, and there's like, oh, maybe we should do something about that. So then we had no idea that that CLE was planning to do something. We just like talked very informally at Flock about it. We were like, this seems like a good first step. So we did it, we proposed it. No one came out yelling at us that this is a horrible idea, which was nice. And then we started doing it. And I think the total number of proven packagers is like somewhere, oh, Neil's saying, well, sort of. Okay, fine. There's a little more that happened there. Neil, would you like to fill that in?
Well, I wasn't the I don't think anybody, well, there was at least a couple of people who I don't care about who's basically said like, nope, this is awful and we shouldn't do this because it doesn't solve any problems. I'm like, I think the bulk of the valid criticism is that the MFA implementation in Fedora is atrocious compared to pretty much.
I was getting there.
Yeah, and on top of that, our authentication infrastructure is not reliable, which makes this significantly worse. I seem to be somehow disproportionately impacted by this, which is all kinds of funny and horrible, but I am not the only person that suffers through these issues. And that it is concerning and upsetting to introduce more barriers without dealing with the table stakes problems that we already have. And that has been, I think, the bulk of my complaint ever since we brought up the idea of moving to 2FA by default 6 years ago. Because this is not even the first time we've talked about this. Like, this has come up before. And as I brought it up back then, I brought it up again in the most recent discussion, we have to have a good self-service. We have to have a good strategy that assumes that we don't have to email Kevin Fenzi and hope that he's alive to respond. Like, that is currently how almost every administrative process works. If there's a self-service flow, the self-service flow doesn't work and we have to email Kevin. If there is no self-service flow, we have to email Kevin. And so that is a big problem that has to be fixed as we move towards more complicated flows for things.
Yes. So that was one of the major reasons why people were hesitant to enabling 2FA for everyone, and why we only limit it to these specific people, is because we knew there are some problems, but proven packagers have a huge amount of access. So we're like, this seems like a reasonable thing. And even the people who, when we discussed this 3 years ago and had the same infrastructure issues, were like, no, this is horrible. We can't ever do this. We're like, it affects like 50 people because half of the proven packagers had already enrolled in it. So we're like, we're going to take this first step. And then the way we did that was a very manual process, because as Neil was starting to point out, we don't really have a way to like actually enforce this or like provide a flow for people to enroll in 2FA like when they're trying to log in. So what we're doing for this is we're sending out manual emails based on the data that we have in the account system as to who has not enrolled yet. And then in a month, we're planning to like actually go in and remove proven package or access from all the people who have not enrolled in 2FA within the 3 months. So that works fine for 50 people. And I have a script to send these emails, and Kevin has a script to give me the people I need to send emails to. Thank you, Kevin, as always. So that's like working okay, but kind of the second thing is if we want to move this out to everyone, which is something that I think we should do, there are some table stakes that we need to achieve first. And I think that's first, there's been some instability in the account system, which seems to prevent certain people with 2FA from actually logging in some cases. So that's actually being worked on, and there's been patches to Epsilon, which is what we use for Open ID Connect authentication, which I think have landed. And there's some other things going on there to hopefully fix all those problems. So obviously we want to fix that before we broaden this requirement to everyone else. And then also we need a way to actually enforce this that's not just sending people emails and removing their access if they don't respond, since that's terrible. And then also we're hoping to have a self-service mechanism implemented for recovery, which we don't have yet, but that basically means when people set up 2FA, they're provided a list of tokens that they can save somewhere, and if they lose access to their 2FA devices, they can put in those tokens to restore access to their account and not have to bother Kevin. And then also it would be nice if we had some proper support for hardware security devices, because many people have those and they're not well supported in our current system. So I guess those are kind of I think that was 4 things that we would need before I would be open to broadening this to everyone else.
All right. If your hand is green, go for it.
Oh, I'm green. Okay. Yeah, so I will echo what Steve and Maxwell said there as far as an enforcement mechanism. I think we would need to get some changes to IPA to allow us to say this group requires the person you add to have a OTP enrolled. And then so if somebody tried to add someone to one of those groups, it would just say they need to enroll, and it wouldn't let them. And then some sort of enforcement mechanism, perhaps like if they're logging in, they don't have an OTP, they're in a group that requires one, it just redirects them to the flow to enroll or something like that. So that's going to be IPA changes, I think, and maybe some changes on Noggin, which is our front end to that. So I think that is proven packagers has been doable in this manual way. Packagers, maybe it's going to be a lot more work, but extending past that, I think, is just not tenable to do without some kind of enforcement stuff. As far as the instabilities and issues, we've had a lot of account issues, as people know. We had upgraded our IPA clusters from RHEL 9 to RHEL 10, which of course went beautifully in staging, no problems whatsoever, and did not go nearly so well in production, unfortunately. Hopefully that's behind us now. All the clusters reinstalled, all of it's in sync. But then now we've run into some new problems with Epsilon as far as logging some people in. I don't know if there's like a clause in there that says if you're Neil, don't let him log in, but we'll find it and we'll fix it. So yeah, that's definitely table stakes to just get this more reliable. Definitely annoying to us as it is to everyone else. What else was I going to say? Oh, the original incident that kind of prompted Fesco here, the person having his AI agent do a bunch of stuff. It's just worth noting that he was not a packager at all. He was a QA guy from a long time ago. And so he had some privileges in Bugzilla because he was in the QA group, but that's it. He didn't actually touch any packages, although he did submit PRs to some packages. But even though that was not, he was not a packager, or his agent was not a packager, and I can certainly understand why that would prompt people to think about this a little more closely in the agent world that we live in. I'm trying to think if there was anything else I was going to respond to. Maybe not. I'll pass it along.
Aoife, go for it.
Okay. I just want to know if the proposal that Steve shared is actually intending to address the packager thing. Like, does that commit CLE to do the work of those table stakes, to get them from the table and the stakes into the ground? Is that what that we're just so I'm following the train of thought?
I don't think we've signed up CLE for anything at this point. And if we do sign up CLE for something, that will be at the cost of forage work, basically. So
The plot thickens.
we've got Tomasz here for all prioritization conversation.
We don't have the capacity to do anything else than forge and dist-git. And the Bugzilla is coming in, so
So what's the future of the proposal then for the packagers, given that there's an awful lot of work that has to happen to make it realistic?
I'll jump in here real quick. So think of the proposal as something that happened basically at the same time as FESCO deciding that they needed to do something about this too. So it sort of is along the side, and these things will probably merge together. I expect that proposal to be modified with the outcome of what happens with the proven packagers right now, right? Which, like I said before, like it ends. Forgetting the ticket when it specifically ends, but there's a certain date that, like, by this time we expect, everyone who's going to move. Thank you, September 24th. Everyone who's going to move over will have moved over, and that kind of thing. We'll use that data to refine this proposal. Right, it'll probably go beyond proven packagers to something else, right? I don't want to say it's going to be everybody, and I also don't want to say it's packagers, but we'll use that information to refine it, and then try to move that forward with Jeff and other folks here as well, and the council, of course, and stuff, to see what makes sense and how we can bite that off. In terms of people doing work, I imagine it'll be a combination of folks, because it's going to be development work, it's going to be infra work, it's going to be testing work, it's going to be verification work. So I don't see it being any one specific, oh, this is an infra team thing, or, oh, this is a developer task. No, I think it's going to be a lot of different groups working together.
Thanks, Steve. That does make a bit more sense.
Yeah. So I put my hand up way back when somebody said that Kevin, as your password recovery is not a good answer. And I just wanted to underline something here. It's not just that we don't want to overload Kevin. It's that you shouldn't count on a person to do the due diligence of what a password recovery activity would be doing, because the same thing that maybe allowed an attack or encouraged an attacker to try a password recovery route is they might already have the credentials that would give Kevin the confidence that, oh, this is the right person. So Kevin, I'm saying your name a bunch and I see your hand is up. So if you want to skip in front of Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, I did have some other things I wanted to mention. IPA has written their own identity prior OAuth handler, whatever, Adapta, and we're looking at that to replace Epsilon, hopefully soon. Also, AB, the guy from the IPA project, has written a patch to do recovery codes for Noggin. He submitted that a while back. Aurelian gave him some feedback that needs to be adjusted. He's hoping to get back around to that in a few weeks, and hopefully we can get recovery codes implemented in Noggin due to his patch and his work, which would basically, when you enroll, you get a thing to download, you get recovery tokens that can be used to log in or whatever. So hopefully in the near term, that at least that little piece of it would be implemented. So yeah.
right. And Jeff, back to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So without getting into the details of how it's implemented, because clearly that is not my concern directly, I am concerned about as we implement this, we're thinking just about packagers, and I'm thinking about commit access, and more importantly, any elevated privileges. And it's not clear to me right now how, just even in the FAST account system, how we account for which groups actually have elevated privileges, where we might want to enforce this beyond packagers. Packagers are understood, but I think there's a mapping between FAST groups and things like which Forge teams can commit to which Forge repos. Right now, I learned that administrators for discourse aren't FAST controlled. That's a discourse thing, so that's harder to. But as an administrator, I should require F2A for FAST accounts for that too, right? So as we do this, I want to make sure we have a more transparent process of knowing which groups in the infrastructure have elevated privileges, especially write privileges to things. I'm less concerned about Bugzilla. I'm less concerned about the docs, but that is an attack vector, right? Because someone could put instructions in the docs that we don't see that inform people to do something that is malicious. So I just want, hopefully there's a way to start making that more visible so we can review it and we can know what parts of the system really do need to have this enabled as we understand the attack vector a little more.
I really would just like to enable this for everyone, but we're just not there yet in terms of or at least everyone who is part of any group. Like we have a Fedora contributors group, and anyone who's in any group is automatically included in the Fedora contributors group. It would be great if we enabled that for everyone, and I want to do that, but if we don't have the resources to implement those changes in our account system, then it's hard to do that. I mean, what PyPy did, the Python packaging index, is they've kind of slowly rolled out 2FA to different groups. Now it's required for like everyone who uploads any type of package, even if it's like an April Fool's package on PyPy, you still have to have 2FA enabled on your account. And the way they went about doing that is they slowly started with the people who maintain like the most crucial ecosystem packages. I forget what it's called, but there's some classification for a Python package that a lot of other things depend on. And it started with those people, and then they slowly rolled it out to other people. And the way they were able to accomplish this is the PSF Python Software Foundation funded a full-time security engineer who actually not only addressed security issues with authentication, but various other issues in PyPy. And then because of that, they were able to make this a requirement for everyone and actually do it in a way that's supportable and usable by even the most casual people, uploading some toy project, and also, major enterprises uploading things to the Python packaging index that are downloaded millions of times a day or whatever it is. But we have to actually do that and want to do that and fund that. And that's where things get difficult.
And what you just said, Maxwell, and what Jeff said, I actually, both those things are important. And I would also love to have this go for everybody, the 2FA. But Neil does have a point that I'm going to try to say succinctly, and do correct me if I'm misrepresenting it here, Neil, accidentally, which is, if we want to enable two-factor for folks, we first need to have a stable authentication and authorization base underneath it to build upon. And right now it sounds like there's enough frustration with some blips that adding more to what's there already may not be the best path forward. And so maybe focusing on that to make it more stable before we roll out 2FA further might be a good option. Is that about correct, Neil, with what you were trying to
I mean, we used to have a security officer, and he helped design our original security model before the move to noggin-based FAS. That was Patrick Wiecic, and he's no longer. He left Red Hat, then came back, but not here. So I don't know what the heck happened to him. But he was our security officer for Fedora infrastructure for the longest time. But without that, like essentially our security model posture, whether we're talking about in the distribution or in the infrastructure, has decayed over the past several years. And, you know, we're talking about this uplift into like requiring 2FA for things. And like, I've never thought about it as just for packagers. Actually, the thing I'm most worried about is moderators. I don't even care about back office infrastructure people or packagers. Those people get more vetting than our moderators do. The moderators are the scary ones to me, because that's fast controlled. That group is managed through there. They are elevated. They can do whatever the heck they actually want. And there is no audit trail for them. So as soon as an account is hijacked, it's a mess. We don't know anything. And so I am more worried about that than anything else. That all being said, mass 2FA in principle, I like, but in practice, no way. Until things get even remotely better. Like we got to have I need some proof of betterance and some kind of idea of what our posture is going to be before I would be confident about doing it.
Just want to interject something really quick, because both the proposal that FESCO approved and the one that CLE has not yet put forward is about setting a mandatory use of 2FA. We're already in a place where people can configure 2FA and then have a terrible experience. Like this is not a, hey, should we make 2FA possible for this class of people? No, it's already possible for everybody, and it is not good.
Yeah, I mean,
many of them.
The problem is that everyone has accepted that it's okay that for optional 2FA, we can have a crap situation. I'm saying that as soon as you change it from optional to mandatory, it is no longer acceptable. I don't even argue it's acceptable at all to begin with, but this was the consensus that already existed. Like the consensus is it's okay for this experience to be bad because it is not mandatory for the majority of people. As soon as we start increasing the number of people that it's mandatory, like that is a far less defensible stance. I mean, I personally would argue it was never defensible, but that was the stance that was given. So here we are.
Yeah, I think that stance that we can't make it mandatory for everyone until we improve the situation was shared by not just the people here who've spoke, but others on FESCO who voted for that first proposal as well.
Kasha, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just I'm listening to this quietly and trying to understand. Is Neil's position that if you don't have, unless you have a proper recovery token process, you're against the mandating 2FA for even proven packagers? Are we overestimating the risk?
I was, yes. I actually voted down the proposal to make it mandatory for proven packagers for this reason. But hey, I was outvoted, and I may be outvoted again and again. That doesn't change the fact that I think it's absolutely a horrible idea.
Yeah, I understand your position, but I'm still not convinced whether the risk is that high. There are about 120 proven packagers, I guess, and the question I think I would ask myself is it going to be a worse situation to have one-factor authentication or single-factor authentication compared to this 2FA with Kevin in the loop, or how are you going to call it, human in the loop rather? I don't think so. And as Max says, I'm only talking from a user's point of view. So as Max says, there is a process. Go on.
The problem is that before even starting this enforcement mandatory proven packager 2FA, I think it was in the thread a couple months ago that they get 15 requests a month to reset credentials. Like, that's actually a lot for such a low amount of adoption. And if it proportionally increases, CLE is not going to be doing anything except resetting credentials all damn day. That's not acceptable.
I agree. Hey, Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I'm one of those FESCO people who have reservations about this proposal, and like, well, I'm not as extreme as Neil as saying like, I don't even want it for proven packages. I'm a weak. It's probably okay to like allow proven packages, to mandate it for proven packages, provided it doesn't go any further until all the known issues are fixed. For what it's worth, when I turned on my 2FA, I had to get it reset because it totally broke. And only Aurelian managed to figure out how to actually fix it, which is like, oh, so it turns out there is an HA proxy, and like your request might go to one of two servers, and depending on your browser security settings, the cookie that tells it to like pin to the right server is not passed along. So basically, like, oh yeah, like disable like Firefox enhanced protection on like on ID.Fedora project, and your life is a bit better. I would also note that Neil and I don't always have Kerberos on some of the machines we have to use, and that seems to be something that is not tested. And yeah, like I mean, I'm borderline like saying proven packages probably know people in infra well enough that the risk of social engineering should be low. I am totally not comfortable pushing it to like more people just in the name of security, because like bad security is just making people cut corners just like to tick boxes. I'm hoping that like with FESCO like saying like, hey, like this is affecting us, this is hampering our productivity. I've never seen Neil late to so many meetings before, like compared to before he turned on 2FA. If our feedback cannot be used to improve the thing, then I guess we need to look at something that's not free IPA, that actually supports things like recovery better.
Yeah, so a couple things here. The first is that we're not trying to relitigate FESCO's choice. Like, it made a choice, and unanimity was not part of it. There are good arguments for either position, but we're here to talk about, well, what next? So CLE has kind of been sitting on the sideline now, going, we're getting data in, and it looks like this is not the situation of the infrastructure is not one where we want to put this proposal forward. The infrastructure needs to be updated in some way, but I think at the same time we're not taking a lead on doing anything about that because we've got our energy going into other important things. I was curious, we've got a few people that are primarily CentOS people here. How does this read for you? How does this affect you? And what's your read on all this? But first, Kevin.
I can defer to Troy if you want. That's perfectly fine too.
I was just going to do a quick answer. I'm a proven packager, and I've had this. I switched mine. I didn't have any problems. I still haven't had any problems. But it basically has, I won't say forced, but it is forced. But for me, it's a good thing. Forced me to have two-factor authentication every time I log into CentOS. Not CentOS Stream Red Hat, but the CentOS community parts. So by doing it in Fedora, you're forcing the same thing on CentOS. So if this does come up to a vote, I think you should include the CentOS community because it directly affects them because we're using their authentication.
Can I make a small clarification? I just wanted to say this is also something I brought up yesterday when we were talking about this. Is I think it's important to kind of make a distinction between there are some like issues with instability, which Kevin said were mainly caused by the update of the IPA cluster. Those are infrastructure things which are seemingly fixable and which infrastructure is actively working on. I just kind of want to separate those two things from like the additional features surrounding enforcement of 2FA for certain groups and recovery tokens and hardware tokens, which are things that we don't have implemented at all. I know it's all just things that need to be done, but I think it's important to make a distinction between those two categories.
Which only adds complexity, right? And I think that from the perspective of what's you know, how is CentOS impacted? We're the same name, you know, we're a slightly different namespace on the same infrastructure. So from that perspective, I don't think that it's a complication outside of what Neil has already identified, is that we have people who are not necessarily living by the same rules who are now being bound by those rules as well.
So I just wanted to make a quick clarification. So our authentication stack is complicated. We have IPA backing everything. We have Epsilon as an identity provider. We have Noggin as a front end. There's all these different pieces that talk to each other. And some of the problems are in one piece, and some of the problems are in another piece, and some of the problems are talking between each other. And there have been a number of issues, and we've actually fixed a number of issues, but then more of them have been cropping up. So I am hopeful that at some point we will get back to a stable state and everything will be solved. There's been some long-term things that got solved too, like used to be some people would log in and get a permission denied page, and Aurelian actually tracked down what the bug was there in Epsilon and actually fixed it. So there are things getting fixed. It's just a thing. But again, we probably don't want to derail things here, so I'll pass along.
Hey, I just want to, David said that we've got a lot of the same infrastructure, and it's true, like we share the account system or whatever, but it is different in that in CentOS, I say we, I'm in both areas. I'm sorry, CentOS versus Fedora. Like the CentOS stuff is all in GitLab. Fedora is moving to the Forge. Like there can be different rules set between these two different things in terms of what we require. I mean, I've been in general a fan of like, I don't want to moderate anything that doesn't sit behind FAS, first of all. Like WordPress comments, gross. But like, I don't think 2FA should be optional. I think the stance should be we need to require 2FA for anything that gets you any sort of real privileges within the project. And rather than argue about, you know, whether this piece is good enough or that piece is good enough, like we set this as, this is the requirement that will happen. What are the blockers? What are the resources that Red Hat needs to commit to solve those blockers? And what's our timeline? Like, it shouldn't be an if, it should be a, what do we need to do? Because we're doing it. Pat.
Fabian.
Yeah, just a small remark. I wanted to reiterate on what Kevin said about the and Red Hat about the CentOS namespace. So CentOS is a little bit different in the sense that yes, we are sharing FAS and IP backend, but only for the community part. And of course, the security threat is different because proven packager in Fedora world means impacting directly the main deliverable of Fedora, which is the Fedora distribution. For CentOS Stream, the maintainer of CentOS Stream distribution are not using FAS at all because it's Red Hat authentication and it's not the community account they use at all. So the only way it would affect if for FAST, the CentOS board would like to enforce somehow 2FA, that will be just for the special interest groups, so for the community part of it, but nothing internal to CentOS because they have already mandate 2FA for Red Hat security. So this is a little bit different, and the target and the security threat is different because for Fedora, it's impacting the distribution. For CentOS, it can't be because they are using something different already. So CentOS as a distribution is one deliverable that is not community-facing directly because community can't interact with that build. They can see, they can propose merge requests, but not do anything in the build. So that's one thing. And I don't know if the CentOS board has an idea about doing that, because if I understand the proposal correctly from FESCO, that would be for proven packages. So that's a group. That means you can enable that for these people in this group, but special interest group for CentOS are different. On the other hand, I'm also part of one of the special interest group for CentOS, which is the VERTSIG, and the SIG chair decided to enforce 2FA because he sent a mail to the VERT special interest group. Oh, I would like to turn that on because I think it's a good idea. Do you think it's a good idea? Nobody complained, and it's enforced on that namespace already. So there are pros and cons, but from a security perspective, yes, it makes much more sense in 2026. But I agree also when I see that Neil and others, it seems, have issue with 2FA, that maybe for step one would be just to have a look at building a foundation for authentication that works all the time, and then put more and more on top, instead of having people complaining for basic authentication stuff. Brendan, you're next.
No, Pat's next. He's got the green.
Sorry, I miss. Sorry, Pat.
No worries. My sort of big picture thinking on the CentOS side is that in the CentOS area, we have a SIG council that exists to discuss technical things. And so they would be the people I would want to primarily chat with about making technical changes to how things happen. They're not the final voice in stuff, but they exist as a group because we want and need to solicit their feedback. And so I wouldn't want to ignore them. From a structural side, Red Hat controls the stream function of the packages, but we have some other higher privilege, higher import things, primarily relating around our existing kerfuffle with Secure Boot. And so folks that have Secure Boot build access should probably have two-factor, but I don't actually know if that is off the ground or not. That I lost track of it. That's just straight up, I put other things in my brain and lost track of it. But in practice, I wouldn't want to make changes to how the SIG community functions without talking to the SIG council. That's just sort of my step one. That's sort of where I'm at.
Well, sounds like this is pretty fundamental to everybody but mailing list users. So at least we can still talk about changes in the next Fedora release. But for everything else, we probably need to do something here. And the question in my mind is, now what? So I am very receptive to the idea that we don't have time to work on this. But man, I'm also not going to have time to work on a supply chain attack that gets pulled off by somebody who is either a proven packager, there's going to be a limited time risk, or a packager who just happens to have a core piece of technology that they're responsible for. Boy, that would take a whole lot of time and energy, and not just like software development energy. It would be terrible. So I think we should talk about next steps. How do we take the shared understanding that we have developed over the last 50 minutes and turn it into some sort of action? Not a, I solemnly swear I'm going to go solve this problem, however big it is, but how big is this problem? What is the next logical step here? Because it seems like maybe this is a lot of work, or maybe this is like 3 bug fixes in infrastructure plus 1 feature implementation that would take a week. I don't know. And it seems like knowing the answer to what the actual work is something that we should come away with. Stephen Gallagher, your hand was up, but then it went back down again.
I was actually just going to point out too that 2FA is definitely good for securing your account, but we actually have a more fundamental problem, which is we don't actually really have a great vetting process for how people get elevated privileges anyway. So whether or not they have 2-factor authentication, it's actually not all that hard for someone to social engineer their way into a perhaps not a proven packager, but certainly into a packager. And whether or not they have 2FA isn't really going to prevent a supply chain attack through that vector. We don't check anything about a packager once they've completed their sponsorship.
Yeah, I'm not seeking perfection here, just improvement.
Well, sure, but I'm challenging whether and to be clear, I am very fond of 2FA, and I think it should be used everywhere, absolutely. But and here in Fedora as well, but there are some recovery problems. But I feel like that right now it's focusing on the wrong spot. It's not the bottleneck of the problem. If our goal is to reduce the possibility of supply chain attacks, it's optimizing at the wrong point in the chain.
I think it's just optimizing for a different attack vector.
Right. I'm saying it's optimizing for an attack vector that it doesn't. An attack vector that would be a problem if we didn't have this gigantic hole in the wall next to it.
Neil, I think do I understand correctly that you're observing that the hole in the wall is something that we can't solve because no one knows that we're dogs on the internet?
Well, I mean, yes, there is that, but also fundamentally, open source falls apart as soon as you start assuming a low trust society, which is essentially what this is boiling down to. The further down the chain you move on trust levels, like you go from high trust to mid trust to low trust, as you move down that chain, open source falls apart. Like you cannot make open source work at scale if you decide that we are a low trust society, from that perspective, because now you have to go and personally vet everyone. You have to just reject all contributions from people until you know who they are. You need all this levels of stuff, but it's not realistic.
I disagree with that very, very strongly. I think that you can have a high level of initial trust and monitor for bad behaviors, at which point you can reduce someone's privileges.
Sure, but that's not the same thing as what you were originally implying. Like calling it a hole in the wall.
Perhaps not, but what I'm saying is what I was trying to originally imply is that we need stronger ways to detect when someone has gone rogue or their account may have been compromised. I think that should be a higher priority than necessarily throwing on additional authentication restrictions.
Right. I mean, like I alluded to this earlier, but I think it bears mentioning again. We actually don't have a way to do auditing. In theory, we have the data to do it, but in practice, that data is unusable. So we don't have a way of saying, oh, we know the actions that this person has done. We can follow through the messages and determine whether something is anomalous or not. We don't actually have that kind of capability to say, oh, there is a pattern here that doesn't math up, and somebody should be notified. We don't have any of those mechanisms. I'm saying it's fundamentally unsolvable because there is no way we're going to have resources to do it. And so we will have to acknowledge that this is something that isn't going to be resolved.
So I'm going to put a pin in this one because it is a topic unto itself that I would be delighted to cover at some future date. So Maxwell, go ahead. Then I'm going to close this out.
Yes, I was going to agree with you. I do think those topics are very important, but also orthogonal. So I think we've defined our requirements. We've said what we'd like to see implemented and fixed before 2FA. is mandated, and I at least think that we should at some point mandate 2FA. If there's some like fancy agile way that you would like us to list out those requirements, we can also do that. But other than that, I'm not really sure what else there is for us to discuss here about this particular topic.
Yeah, I guess the thing that
resources.
Yeah, so the thing I would need to see is something that tells me what kind of resources are we talking about? Because right now it's just, we know that we're missing stuff, but I need to like see what is the work, what is the breakdown. So next step is work breakdown. I'm not sure whose responsibility that is, but if it's somebody's, maybe we can support that somebody. It feels like a next step, not all the steps, but a next step is just really writing down what's necessary. Is that in the proven packager ticket? Is that something that we should be adding into the one that CLE hasn't put forward yet? I think that's kind of the open question. That's like the next step to make progress on this.
Yeah, I mean, even the proposal that CLE put forward lists a bunch of things that we don't have yet. And then I asked, oh, who's going to do that? And then we weren't sure about that yet.
Okay. Well, let me do this then. We've had a good discussion here. It's been very comprehensive. I will see if we can put some energy into just doing a little bit of work breakdown. So this is not a commitment to do the work. I would be delighted actually if somebody in the community stood up to do this. But I think it's a lot easier to stand up and do something when what that something is narrowly scoped. So I will see if in the next few weeks we can get somebody in the team to at least write down some of the high-level things that we need to get done and a little bit of detail. So we have more that we can work with. And I think if we do that, it might help other people stand up and take part. Because ultimately we want this to be a community distribution that members of the community can take part in every area. And with that, we are at time. Thank you all for the conversation today. That was very detailed. I'm gonna have to go through it one more time just to be sure I caught everything. I will see y'all later. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
Take care.